and welcome again to Theories of Reality. I'm Professor Borrowdale, and we're going to continue talking about the mind-body problem. And I did a fair amount of lecturing last time, and I think we're going to get into more class discussion about whether or not you have a soul, and whether there's a difference between the mind and the body, or whether they're just different aspects of the same thing. In particular, I think that the main debate here seems to be, at least in Western culture, between dualism and materialism. So let me call up my PowerPoint here again. Last time we were talking about parallelism, also known as occasionalism. And the question I posed was, well, first of all, like, what did you think about this idea? So what's the big problem? The big problem is, can an immaterial substance causally affect a material substance? So you think about this as sort of ghostly substance that doesn't occupy time and space. It's sort of ethereal. You think about it sort of floating around, and then you have, like, hard material substance. And the question is, how does this ghostly immaterial substance affect a material substance? And so Leibniz's answer is, well, it doesn't. It just looks like that. And it's kind of like, I get the analogy of a movie soundtrack. So you see the character's lips moving on the screen, and then you hear the words coming out of the speaker, but they're recorded separately and they're played back separately. They're two completely separate processes. But because they're synchronized perfectly, hopefully, right? Unless you ever watch a YouTube video and the sync gets off and the lips aren't moving at the same rate, or you watch a dubbed film, like a foreign film, like that's when things get off, you notice it. But when things are exactly synchronized, you don't think about them being separate. And you're thinking, like, when Ben Affleck, delivers a line poorly in some movie, right, before something blows up, and you think, oh, well, like that, he said that, right? You think the words are coming from his mouth, when in reality it's this process is just synchronized up that makes it look like the sounds are coming out of his mouth, when really you're looking at a two-dimensional screen, and then you're hearing this separate audio track that was mixed separate, recorded and mixed completely separately. And sometimes you get, like, what they call ADR, where, like, they're doing something really in a noisy area, and then later on the guy goes in the studio. And I've actually done this they have a great film program here. It's Media Arts, where you can make student films. And you go in the studio and you play back the movie, and then you get an actor, and the actor has to, like, watch it and try to, like, say the words as their lips are moving on the screen and get it to sync up.
That sounds so hard.
It is, but it's, you get this, like, sometimes it's easier if you, like, I don't know, there's a guy on the back of a motorcycle and it's being revved, and the guy is supposed to say some snappy line, say, let's go, or something like, and you can't do that, because in real life, if you just record the natural sound, you just get the motorcycle. So you bring the actors back and you do this ADR. Sometimes it's like you're on a beach, right? And the crashing waves are coming and they're making a bunch of racket. Sometimes it just gets ruined. There's, like, the sound guy screws up, or an airplane flies over, or whatever, and they bring him back and to do this work. So it just shows you that they're separate processes. So Leibniz's idea is that at the beginning of time, God synced up all these physical causes, from the creation of the world to what your body is doing right now. And he also synced up all the spiritual causes, all the intentions and desires you had since you first had intentions and desires. And the two of them are just synchronized perfectly, so that God arranges it so, like, God knew that I would say, where's my, that would have an intention to take a drink. I'm like, where's my drink? Oh, it's in my bag here. And so he arranged that my body would move over and follow that intention and fulfill my desire.
So there's no free will?
So that's a problem for Leibniz. Leibniz is actually a compatibilist, so we'll talk about this later. The compatibilists think that they think that all your actions being determined is compatible with them being free, which sounds like a contradiction. And they just say, if you think that's a contradiction, you're confused about what freedom means. Freedom means doing what you want to do. What you want to do is caused. Everything's caused. But those actions where you do what you want to do, those are free. But yeah, I mean, you raise a good question that for the ordinary definition of free will, of like being able to do otherwise, what if I say, well, for the sake of this philosophical example, I'll abstain from water, right, and have a dry throat just to prove a point. But then Leibniz said, well, God knew that I was going to do that, so he arranged my body to do that. So but you think about like why, first of all, like why did you come up with such a kooky theory? I suppose would be one question. Why would
Reasons why things happen in the world.
Yeah, and he's trying to explain why things happen. Why not just say, well, your mind, why not just go with Descartes' view? Your mind makes your body do things, your body makes your mind do things, and they go back and forth, and it's a two-way street, and it happens in some mysterious way we don't understand.
When you say mind, you're referring to spirit, technically.
Yeah, I'll just say your soul. Yeah.
Okay.
So suppose your mind and body are different. Your mind is your soul, and your body is your physical body.
Your brain.
And assume your body's made out of matter. And so you have this two-way reaction where we talked about examples last time, like you think of a sad memory and you start to cry, or somebody says Trump and you get angry, or you have or you drink copious amounts of alcohol and all of a sudden you can't think too well, right? And your judgment is impaired, and
your brain.
Yeah. So there's like you do things to your brain that affects cognition, so your body, right? You do things to your body that affects. We didn't talk last time about physical pain, but that's another example, right? You hit your thumb with a hammer, and all of a sudden you have a mental sensation of pain. So the pain happens in your brain. So you do things to your body that affects consciousness. You can even have even your morality, your sense of right and wrong can be affected by the physical world, by your brain. There's I think in the text I talk about this guy Phineas Gage, and he has like a railroad spike knocked through his head in an accident. And I have to read that story again. I'm like, how did this happen again? How did the guy accidentally get a railroad spike through his head? But somehow it was like an industrial accident. They're building the railroad. And the guy, he had damage to the part of your brain that processes social relationships. And there's a part of your brain that deals with that. And so he had damage to his brain, and it affected the way he interacted with other people. He had wild mood swings. He couldn't, have all his friendships dissolved. He didn't want to be around people anymore, and just had all these things happen to him. Whereas before he was like a likable guy, got along with people, and he turned into this sort of antisocial misanthrope because he had damage to his brain. And so, there's the evidence that the psychopaths have something wrong with their brain. People that have no sense of morality, and they play act to make people think that they're normal, but in reality they're kind of like a reptile or something like that. It's all about like desires and satiating desires and having control over their environment, but they have no empathy for other people whatsoever. And we think there's a difference in their brain, an abnormality that causes that in a small percentage of the population. Well, this seems to cause a lot of problems for Descartes' view, right? That your consciousness, including your sense of right and wrong, your conscience, right? Your conscience and your consciousness are both part of an immaterial substance. The same thing with your memories. See, Descartes thinks your memories are in your mind, which is an immaterial substance. Now there's a study just that came out just in the last few days, it hit the news anyway, that they've got some new imaging system to see what a memory looks like etched in your brain. they can actually like see what it looks like, and eventually like be able to trace memories in your brain, try to figure out why some of them disappear, why people have problems remembering things, and so like to think about like there's actually a part of your brain where there's a differences that can be empirically observed, like there's that particular memory right there in your brain. Is kind of exciting, but again it raises questions for this idea that consciousness is an immaterial substance that's different from your brain, that maybe works through your brain but is entirely different from it. And the idea people have is that when their soul leaves their body, it's going to take all their memory, their personality, their sense of right and wrong, their conscience, their ideals. That all these things are to follow them, to the other life, the other world, and their body's going to decay, and that thing will still be them.
If consciousness was what created your morality, then you shouldn't be able to change your morality if it's spiritually based, right? So, like, that's a good idea.
I'm not sure that necessarily follows.
Yeah, because you kind of need a reason for your morality to be what it is.
Yeah.
It's like how the stimulus.
But I mean, if this is based off of religion, then there's like a set ruling of what your moral should be.
Well, Descartes would say that you have innate ideas about right and wrong, that you have a conscience and a sort of a sense, and similar to like you have concepts about like how to like understanding like mathematics. Like you don't need to learn how to do math empirically. You just sort of get it at a certain point. You learn how to count, and then you learn like what number is, and then like the concepts of numbers and addition and subtraction and multiplication. Like somebody needs to tell you about it, but once you there's something in your brain that says, okay, I can see how that's true, and I can see how that works. Then the same thing about like right and wrong. That the argument Descartes makes is you have this innate sense.
Someone explains
right
something,
and
and then you're like, oh, okay, I see why.
you get it, yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to,
But then that would mean you'd have to be taught morals and whatnot.
I do remember hearing a couple of people say there was an experiment where they took infants and they showed them a video of these shapes. Like there's a square, a rectangle, and they were beating up on a triangle. And when they gave them these shapes to play with, they would separate the two aggressive ones from the one that was getting beaten up. These are infants.
Fascinating.
They haven't had a chance to learn anything, but they know right from wrong, at least in that situation.
yeah, there's lots of examples like that of these sort of innate senses of morality people have. Let me see if I can find my mind-body problem. I should probably hook up my computer. Let's find 203. Now I've got it here. There we go. Yeah, so then the question is, you can be back to Leibniz and this parallelism thing, this idea of these two parallel processes. Why would you come up with such a bizarre example like that? And you think, okay, well, maybe Leibniz is just stupid. Does anybody know what Leibniz, I don't know if I mentioned this last time. Oh, there, I've got the weird screen again. I'll fix this during the break, I guess. Anybody know what Leibniz is famous for, apart from philosophy?
No. Wasn't he a partner with like? Oh man. I can't remember the same one.
So what? No, that's probably you're probably thinking about somebody else. So I suppose he's famous for being made fun of in the book Candide. There's this philosopher named Pangloss, and it's a thinly veiled caricature of Leibniz. He's famous for philosophy, for this idea that this must be the best of all possible worlds because a perfect God would only create the best. And the gag in Candide is there's like they're in a ship and they're watching the Lisbon earthquake, which is like one of the worst in Portugal. It's one of the worst natural disasters in the history of mankind, and thousands of people died, and they're watching the the destruction from the safety of the boat, and Pangloss says, "'Tis the best of all possible worlds," right? And as people are like dying left and right, and some guy on the ship says, "Let's go in and loot the city." And more evil on top of evil. So the human evil on top of natural evil. So that's, and I suppose that's kind of a kooky theory too. Although maybe if you start out with the premise that he has, maybe the conclusion I have to follow. I don't know. But the thing he's really famous for, besides philosophy, is coming up with the calculus. So none of you guys are in calculus, or you've taken calculus, or maybe you're in like algebra trig or something like that. But you think about like math classes are things students suffer through and struggle with. Typically, the only time I had a student cry in my office was when it was actually a class called critical thinking, but it was really like the big part of it was logic and like the sort of mathematical style deductive proofs. The student, and she at certain points she started crying. Saying, "I'm trying so hard," and that's the way people feel about math. Well, calculus is like this is pretty much the top of the pile. It's it's calculus and advanced calculus, and Newton's the guy that discovered it. Or sorry, Newton and Leibniz. So Newton and Leibniz came up with it at the same time. So this guy's not stupid. He's like super smart. This is the guy one of the guys who discovered calculus along with Sir Isaac Newton.
So he came out with this a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the 17th century.
Okay.
18th century.
That makes sense.
So he's I think he's into the 18th century. So he's so the main point of this is he's like not stupid, but then why would somebody so smart come up with such a stupid theory? This is a question I often ask in philosophy, by the way. I think about this when I read like some of these postmodern philosophers. It's a useful question to ask. Whenever you read something, you go, huh? You think, why would somebody so smart believe something so stupid? I think if you follow that through, sometimes you find out, well, maybe it's not that stupid after all. Sometimes you think, okay, well, it's stupid, but it's instructively stupid. Like you learn something about like what would motivate someone to do something so stupid. And you might think, well, even though this is like the wrong answer, the thing that motivated them to come up with that answer, there might be something there worth exploring.
Did he try to like use the math to solve problems of philosophy? Like further that?
I suppose in a way he had this theory called the monadology, which actually has a kind of a weird, like geometric type structure to it. I don't want to get into that too much, but it's to him, like, it was such a big problem that how could mind affect body and body could affect mind? How could an immaterial substance affect a material substance? And he took that super seriously, that when you have these two fundamentally different substances with different properties, the question about how one could cause things to happen with the other, if they're totally different, he took super seriously and thought that was such a big problem that the only workaround would be to say that, okay, they don't really interact at all, it just looks like it, and here's why. Right? God set up this sort of,
But he started
these
with the
two parallel
assumption
processes.
that the mind exists. He started with that assumption.
Yeah, I suppose you say, and we'll talk about personal identity in the next chapter, and there's the anti-realist thing that says that the mind doesn't really exist, there is not a substance. So Leibniz takes seriously that there are like individual minds, that they are spiritual substances or souls, and that you have a physical body. And then the question is, well, how do you explain how the two interact? And his answer is, well, they don't, because if they did, it would be really weird. How would that even happen? Now Descartes just throws up his hands and says, well, it's mysterious. It's like gravity. We don't understand it, but we see that it happens. Leibniz isn't willing to do that. He says that's too vague. You can't just say, well, it just sort of happens, right? So he says, okay, you can't have a spiritual substance affecting a physical substance and vice versa. So let's just say, what if God set up these two parallel processes from the beginning of time, and that spiritual causes cause spiritual effects, and physical causes cause physical effects. And so this is the theory he comes up with. And it's sort of, I think this also, it has kind of like an ad hoc, kind of weird, I don't know what you call, it kind of looks like this. In philosophy, there's these things called ad hoc explanations. So you have something that seems like it's hard to accept, and so then you look for some sort of patch where you can, instead of, it's like having a tire that's got like a hole in it. So you can get a new tire, you can try to patch up the old one. A lot of philosophy is trying to patch up holes in theories, and sometimes you get to the theories gets done. You get done with the theory, and it's got more patches than it has tread on the tire, right? So, and this is one of those cases. And it's called an ad hoc explanation, where you have a theory that doesn't really seem to work, and so then you try to patch it up. And this is, it's hard to really explain what ad hoc means. I think that analogy maybe conveys a little bit of it. It's the idea that the theory, you're not sort of trying to change the theory itself and get it to fit the data, but you're kind of trying to fix this one individual case where it looks like it doesn't work, and then just keep the theory. And I think that's what Leibniz wanted to do. He wanted to hold on to dualism. He thought this was a big problem, that how does the immaterial substance affect the material substance? And so this is his only way he could see that could work out. So he gets this kind of weird ad hoc explanation. Another way you can go is with eliminative or reductive materialism. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this, and I want to make I'll have like one question on the exam about this. So materialism is a view that everything's physical. Okay, so if you're a materialist, you believe all that exists is the physical. There are no souls. There's no God, or if there is a God, God's made of material substance. I mean, you could be like Democritus says that if they're gods, they're made out of atoms, right? So everything's made of material substance or physical substance. If you're a materialist, there's no spirits, and that mental phenomena are just aspects of physical phenomena. So that's materialism. So then the question is, how are you going to talk about the physical world? And what are you allowed to say? This is almost like one of the PC speech codes, I guess, except for instead of like the diversity officer, diversity inclusion officer telling you what you can say, it's the scientists. And the scientists are saying, watch your language, because you got to be careful about how you talk, because the words you use convey ideas, and sometimes those are bad ideas. And you don't want to convey any bad ideas and get people thinking the wrong ways. So here's what eliminative or reductive materialism says. You should avoid using mentalistic language. So what is mentalistic language? It's the language is what's called folk psychology. And folk psychology is talk about ideas or thoughts. If you say, I have a great idea, or I have a thought, or I have an intention, or I'm trying to do something, or even I'm afraid, or I'm really angry, right? Those are all the language of folk psychology. And those things seem to refer to like private mental states.
It's more based on emotion.
No, it could be like, you could say, well, I'm thinking about the concept of justice, say. Or I'm thinking, I'm deliberating about this problem. So the idea is that if you're talking about the mind, you either need to talk about brain states or you need to talk about behavior. If you're talking about what's inside your mind that nobody else can observe, that's not talking in an academic way, it's not talking in a scientific way. It's the equivalent of saying Zeus is angry when there's a thunderstorm, right? Now you might say that sort of as a joke, right? Zeus is angry, but imagine like the weatherman, is on the channel saying, "Looks like Zeus is angry today. Thunderbolt, he's throwing thunderbolts left and right in downtown Eugene, and electrocuted some poor sap who was out playing golf in the rain or something, right? And smiting evildoers left and right." So the idea, if you say Zeus is angry when you mean there's a thunderstorm, people might start believing in Zeus, right? Or they might think that there's some angry god up there hurling thunderbolts down at evildoers. People are susceptible to the language you use. So what you should do when you're being a philosopher, when you're being a scientist, when you're being an academic, you should avoid talk about, when you're writing for a journal, you're writing an academic book, you're teaching a class, you're designing a study, you should avoid talk about thoughts and feelings and intentions and beliefs. So how we talk about things. So it's a theory about how we talk about things, and so they say avoid talking about thoughts, beliefs, and intentions, because it's unscientific and it's misleading. So what is a thought? It's or an intention. It's a brain state, right? So you want to look at some brain scan, or you want to talk about firings and the wirings of a person's neurons, or you might talk about their behavior, like what you can observe them doing. But if you talk about like what's in their mind, or what they believe, that's going to steer you off in the wrong direction. And really, I suppose this comes down to, if you think about the epiphenomenalist view, like the epiphenomenalist view there's a question about whether the epiphenomenalists are really dualists or whether they're like simple materialists, I suppose. I don't want to get at it. I was just thinking about this idea that what is a thought? Like the materialist says, basically a thought is a brain event, and so you want to stick to talk about the brain and you talk about behavior, and we'll get to Gilbert Ryle, who seems to be one of these reductive materialists. He's what's called a logical behaviorist, and he says that you should only refer to people's behaviors because that's the only thing that's observable. Yeah.
Well, usually when they try and explain things, I mean, especially back then, they just go for the spiritual, but they did kind of show how people think or how brains are capable of thinking. And they saw that when they would do specific tasks or specific thoughts, they would follow the patterns that neurons would create with the software. And they learned that neurons actually form in 11 different dimensions in the brain. So it'll start off as like a chain. So you begin this thought, whether how simple or complex it is, it'll begin with one line of neurons. Then it creates a two-dimensional shape of neurons pathing off into different ways, then three-dimensional, and then all the way up to like 11 different dimensions of how it's responding with all the different neurons. And that's what gives compound thinking.
That's really interesting because that's the same like number of dimensions that they think hyperspace exists in.
Yeah.
So that the idea is you look at a brain scan and say there's the concept of justice. It's that complex configuration of neurons.
Yeah. And now that we can kind of like see how the brain communicates with itself, I mean, I feel like a lot of questions are going to be answered sooner or later.
Mm-hmm. And that's what the reductive materialists will say. You don't want to get this sort of dualist approach because you'll end up thinking like Descartes. You'll start thinking that you have a mind that's separate from your brain, and then that's going to steer you in the wrong direction. And suddenly you'll have all these beliefs that are going to creep into your studies and your scientific work, and you'll be sort of in two worlds. And then half time you'll be thinking in ordinary language of thoughts and beliefs, and you'll be living kind of like as a dualist, and thinking like Descartes. And then you go in the laboratory and you find yourself thinking, well, but how am I going to quantify this, right? You can't quantify a thought or a belief, but you can quantify behavior, and you can look at a brain scan. So that's just, they would say like, when you're drinking beers with your friends, okay, fine, do the folk psychology thing. But when you're actually trying to study consciousness, you got to stick with rigorously define quantifiable things. Because all that exists is the physical world. There are no thoughts and beliefs or intentions really. All there is, atoms in the void, just physical substance, material substance. So the reductive materials say we should restrict our language when we're doing academic work, scientific work, to precise, quantifiable terms and observations.
It bothers me because I feel like a lot of these types of theories exist because they think that all of the amazing, fantastic things in our physical world that we don't understand yet just must be spiritual or something else. But I don't understand why they can't accept it. I mean, maybe the material world is also pretty insane and can do some really cool stuff as well.
Yeah, there are some ideas. I mean, later on we'll talk about Roger Penrose has this theory of consciousness as a form of coherent quantum energy, and his idea, and he actually believes in the afterlife, and he thinks that this form of quantum energy that exists in the microtubules of your brain, that it persists after death, and that's why people have near-death experiences. This is kind of interesting. He's like a top-notch physicist, and I can't remember. I think he's at Cambridge or Oxford, one of the two. And that's his theory of consciousness. And he was working with an anesthesiologist to study these near-death experiences based on this model he has. Anyway, so that's the reductive materialist or the limited materialist. You typically hear reductive materialist, and reductionism just means you reduce everything to one phenomena. So you don't say there's a bunch of different. The opposite of reductionism is pluralism, where there's a bunch of different kinds of things. The idea of the reductionist is say anything you look at, it can all be reduced to physical phenomena. Love, it's a chemical reaction in the brain. A little oxytocin, a little vasopressin, secreted in the right amounts at the right time, is going to create what we call love, right? And maybe there's some other, and then maybe there's a difference between passionate romantic love and infatuation, and the experience that you have of a long-term relationship, and that's a different set of hormones and so the idea is that love's just a chemical reaction, right? That's it, and it might seem kind of cynical, but that's like the kind of that's the reductionist approach. Is that look at what exists? Are there spirits? Is love this sort of weird ethereal force? No, it's just a chemical reaction. And if you imagine like you're doing like a scientific study on romantic love, and they would say like you want to like measure brain chemicals, right? You want to like observe people without them knowing you're there. I suppose might be some ethical issues there, but you want to you don't ask people survey questions and ask them to introspect, like tell me about it, or do interviews and ask people, tell me about a time you're truly in love. You're not going to learn anything from that, but you will learn something from looking at what their brains do when they're in a romantic setting, or by studying like the behavior of people who are in love, looking at couples who are in beginnings of courtship versus in long-term relationships.
Why does that have to be viewed as cynical?
I suppose maybe it's not.
I know, but like everyone does think that's.
The materials would say. I think the materials would say it's not. It's not cynical. It's realistic. That's what they would say.
That doesn't mean that.
But that's what
it isn't beautiful or it isn't amazing.
I think that's true.
I feel like they look at it as a plan.
You can still have awe and wonder at the world and still believe that it's not created by a. The like big man in the sky or something like that, right? You can. So I mean, but they would say just be careful about watch your language. Is like my little jokey definition of the reductive materialist, and that everything is really boils down to physical substance, and so don't talk about things as if there's this other world of beliefs and thoughts and intentions distinct from the physical world. And the reductive materialist will say, this is what got Descartes in hot water. because Descartes is thinking about the language we use, about thoughts, intentions, and beliefs, and then the language you use talking about the physical world, and says, look, these are different concepts, they're totally distinct concepts, so therefore they must be different substances. And the reductive materialist says, it's just because we're imprecise in our language and we're laboring under these pre-scientific views of the soul. And Descartes, has got 1 foot in the Middle Ages and 1 foot in the modern scientific revolution. And that's his problem. That's why he's a dualist. And what you need to do is sort of, push yourself over, get that foot out of the Middle Ages and put yourself squarely in the scientific paradigm and think about brain states and think about behavior.
Supposedly there was a recent study, and I read this probably like a couple months ago, but it had to do with, it was a very complex experiment, but it was supposed to base whether the brain is made of the same material that the body is made of. And their theory was that the brain actually is made of a different type of matter or whatever it is, and that would dictate, different phenomena like thinking and having the material world change, or just stuff like that. But it was like a legitimate study just to find out whether it was just different material. I wish I could look it up. I don't have my phone, but
Yeah, my understanding is that the neurons in your brain, you might get like specialized neurons, but the neurons in your brain and the neurons in the rest of your body are, similar, but there might be specialized kinds, in our cells differentiate into different specialized cells that do things, but they
or
wouldn't
like
necessarily
why
be
we
anything.
perceive time in the way that we do. I feel like that kind of would have something to do with it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. Time is a big puzzle in
What would
philosophy.
the materialists say about us being, especially with behavior and reactionary creatures? Because all behavior reaction to the stimuli, even memories and thoughts, we want to be proactive. Like we're thinking about, I'm in this situation, I've received stimuli, I want to make an action, but I'm already working off a past action. I receive the stimuli, all my thoughts that I could have to predict the future are also based off of past memories and actions. So are we just...
What makes us so different is that we are capable of thinking in the future. I feel like
it's still a reaction to the past.
Yeah, but we
So
can
can
still
we-
react to the past and predict the future. I feel like animals in general can experience their past, but they can't use that past to dictate the future. It's like if we see something happening and then it happens and then another week goes by and we say, okay, well this could happen, and that would start that's a prediction. It's the predictive measures the brain takes
So does
to
that mean we're proactive?
increase our chances of survival.
I think some animals do have like long memories. And my cat's still one.
Memories, but
But
using those memories is what I'm
danger
speaking.
they're gonna avoid people.
Yeah.
I think they'll learn that from very young, and they'll die believing that.
Does that make them proactive creatures, or are they still reactionary creatures?
Yeah.
Well, they engage in like new behaviors, like sort of scanning and observing behaviors, and then but being so it.
Still
I
reactionary.
Yeah,
suppose
some
that's-
animals are extremely intelligent, that is for sure.
So I don't know if that's like, it depends on how you define like reactionary, behavior. Maybe this is a little tangent. Let's talk a bit about logical behaviorism. This is sort of a way for the materialists to try to answer like the question like, well, what is a thought or a belief? So this is this guy Gilbert Ryle, writing back in the 50s. And he criticizes Descartes as believing that human beings are a ghost in a machine. So, and maybe you heard this before, this sort of the ghost in the machine criticism. This idea that your soul is this kind of ghostly mini-me that exists and kind of floats around and somehow follows your body around wherever it goes. And your body is seen as a mechanism, like a little robot. And Descartes lived at a time when like clockwork mechanisms were just, reaching a point where they're getting pretty sophisticated. So they had like these little automatons. They made these wind-up toys for like rich kids, like royalty, and they would they would walk around. Their eyes would go back and forth, and they're based on these like gears and springs and super intricate. right? And they would do all these sophisticated things. And Descartes kind of thinks about your body is like that. It's like a mechanism, and except for a lot more complex. And so you have this mechanical body that obeys the laws of physics and chemistry and biology. So as far as your body goes, Descartes would say, well, physics creates biology, and or maybe physics. So biology can be reduced to chemistry, and chemistry can be reduced to physics, as far as the physical world. But then there's this spiritual aspect that cannot be reduced or explained in terms of the physical world. You have a mind, you have a soul, and it's different from your body. So he has these two worlds: spiritual world and this ghostly entity that carries your mind, your reason, your conscience, and then there's this physical body that's responsible for your like base impulses and desires and sensations, like your sensation of pain. These things are triggered by your physical body, and then these two things are sort of mysteriously commingled in this way we don't understand. So that's Descartes' idea. And to be fair, Descartes says, I mentioned this last time, Descartes doesn't really have this view. He thinks that mind and body really are commingled in this sort of intimate way that makes it easy for us to confuse them, even though they are distinct substances. So maybe this ghost and machine criticism is not quite what Descartes going for, but Ryle criticizes him as thinking about you've seen like those Japanese animes, like Robot Carnival or something like that, where you have these giant robots, and then there's like a little guy inside the head who's like pulling levers and piloting it like it's like a giant ship. It's like a giant. So you have a giant 50 stories tall robot with like a human being in the head, and he's like pulling the levers. That's sort of Descartes' model of the human being. There's like you, the consciousness in the head, the soul, and then there's the body that follows the soul's orders. And Ryle says that view is just not tenable, and he wants to poke at it. So he says, and this is, I just got this on here, that Descartes says it's not like that, and maybe, again, I think Ryle is maybe saying some things unfair about Descartes' idea about mind and body and how they're joined together. Descartes does say that they're distinct substances, but he also says that they're mixed together in a way that makes it hard for us to distinguish between them unless we think about it in a detached philosophical way. Like I don't say, my body needs to lose 15 pounds. But I say, I need to lose 15 pounds, right? So I think about my body as being me. And, if I, cut my finger, which I did today on my umbrella, I don't think, my finger has been cut and now it's gushing blood. I'm like, my finger, right? It hurts and I see it bleed and I have concern for it. It's not like I see some barnacles on my boat, better scrub those off.
There are a lot of things in your body that you can't control, though. You can't control how fast your heart beats, or... Actually,
that's not true.
Oh, that isn't. Yeah, you're right. No, but there are a lot of things in the body that just do things without us, consciously trying to do it.
That's true. We don't have much control, or
So I guess in that aspect, it's kind of like a machine.
Yeah, you don't have control over your process of digestion. Although, if you're upset about something, I suppose it might get indigestion. But you don't have, whether you're people that have, the diabetes, right? You have control over how much insulin your body produces.
But you don't control.
Or your liver.
Insulin being created in your body.
Yeah, right. Or your liver. It's all part of your autonomic nervous system, right?
So could you relate that to the subconscious instead? Is it the conscious and then subconscious?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's sort of that's the non-conscious part of your brain, I guess. So physiologically, it's down what they call the reptile brain, your medulla oblongata, that controls all those things. It's just you can override those things to some extent with your conscious attention.
Yeah.
You see the gurus
just like you
do
blink, but when you think about blinking.
Yeah. So he says Descartes made what he calls it a category mistake. So a category mistake is when you confuse one fundamental kind of things with another. And so Ryle says category mistakes are really hard to find, but I'll give you some examples, see if you can understand what I'm talking about. So give the example of the university. And here we just talk about, like, you know, the college, I suppose, right? So you could say, you walk around, like somebody says, well, I want to see Lane Community College. And I've been walking around here and I saw like the center building, which is in the center, I get that. And then there's like building 3, which is administration, and then there's building 1, which is enrollment services. But where's Lane Community College? And you explain to them, no, Lane Community College isn't a building. It's the name of an institution. It includes all the building and the staff and maybe like the core value and the mission statements and the charter from the state of Oregon. It's like institutions are complex things. They're made of like a collection of things. It's not an individual building, right? So it's kind of it's a sophisticated, complex concept. It's not the name of a building. And maybe this person's going around, they don't understand what a college is, and they're looking for a building that says Lane Community College. And they think it's different from the library or the center building. So
Pieces are a part of the definition.
yeah, so what is a category mistake? So if someone says, I've seen the library and the center building and enrollment services, but where is Lane Community College? They're missing the point. They're making a category mistake because they're thinking that Lane Community College is just a building on campus when it's the name of the institution. He gives the example of, I think this is a cricket match, so you can translate it to baseball. Imagine you have like somebody over here from a country where they don't play baseball, right? And they're looking at the game and they say, okay, I see that's that guy at the plate, that's the batter. He's got that wooden stick and he tries to hit the ball and it's thrown by the pitcher. The guy behind the batter, that's a catcher. He catches the ball, and if it's not hit, and throws it back to the pitcher. And second base, shortstop. Where's the team spirit? You think, is it that guy over there in the funny costume? Like, no, that's the mascot, right? Okay, is it the guy on second base? Is that the team spirit? No, so you explain the team spirit, that's an attitude amongst all the players such that they, you know, so it's like they come, like if they're way behind, they'll come back and win. Or it means like if the batter gets hit by the ball, he doesn't charge the pitcher's mound and try to beat the guy up, right? So the team spirit is not an individual player, it's a quality of all the players, and it's the way they play the game. So he says, in the same way, you think about mentalistic language. It doesn't refer to another world of ideas as real as the world of trees and rocks and chairs and whatever. Mentalistic language refers to the way people behave under certain circumstances. So to say somebody has a thought, a belief, or an emotion is to say that they are acting a certain way or would act in a certain way under certain circumstances. So that's his, you know, and it's a behaviorist definition. So a thought is not a thing inside your head. A thought is not a state of your soul or a state of your mind. An emotion is not a state of mind. An emotion is the expression of behavior, actual or possible. So you take like a statement like, Al is angry. So, you know, Descartes would look at Al as angry and say, well, Al has Al's soul is in an angry state. Let's see, right? So Descartes would say, okay, anger it's a conscious state, right? It's something that's in your mind. Your mind is immaterial substance, and when you become angry, your mind gets in a state of anger. It takes a certain mode or shape of anger. It's the contents of your consciousness, which is immaterial. Has nothing to do with your body. What Ryle says is that's totally wrong. That treats anger as if it's like a physical substance, as if it's an emotion is like a rock or a tree, but it's not concrete. It's a way of talking about the way a person is behaving. So to say someone is angry means that person, it describes a range of behavior, right? So you might say you're red in the face, you're yelling, pounding his fist on the desk, right? So that's what anger is. It's not a secret mental state. And I suppose this makes sense if you think about like, could you say somebody's angry if they're like smiling and say, how's it going, right? And you know, it's a beautiful day, right? It would make no sense. So you look at a person's behavior, see whether they're angry or not. And anger just is a certain range of, you know, aggressive behaviors. It's not a private, unverifiable mental state in someone's soul. So that's Ryle's argument. Let's see if I have. I want to preview what I have without. Let me just ask what you think about this.
I feel like Al received stimulation that caused a chemical reaction that drove the state of anger, and then like behaves according to that chemical reaction.
Yeah, I think maybe Ryle would agree with you. He would say like that's maybe the physical story, and then there's like the observable, you know, behavioral story.
Yes, I mean, I feel like somebody could be happy and say that it's a beautiful day in a state of anger.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
So here's
Without
what.
it letting it known.
yeah, I mean, you could probably even tell with microexpressions if you're really good at reading it, but like
Like some people are really sad, but you would never be able to tell that they're actually sad.
they're going through like, and some people might feel happy in anger. They might feel happy to be provoked about something too, though. So you could have like a dichotomy of anger and happiness, and we're seeing the one we want to see more possibly, and we see the happy state and ignore the angry state.
And I think also the emotions that we do choose is based off of what society accepts. So like generally, I'm not going to get pissed off in class and just get super angry because society would look down upon that. It'd be weird. But if I'm kind and happy, that's more looked positively by society. So my brain has learned over, I mean, millions and millions of years, people have learned to act a certain way in public. And I feel like that's made like our entire society. Just don't act like that. Just by the way people perceive emotions.
Yeah, people put on false faces all the time, right?
Yeah.
What can Ryle say about that? Like people can, like, sometimes they can misinterpret emotions. Have you ever misinterpreted somebody, like you think they're feeling one way and you got totally wrong? Somebody's crying, right? You're like they're bawling and you think that you're, oh, it's wrong. And it turns out like saw some hilarious meme on the internet and they're like laughing so hard that they're crying, right? You made a mistake. My wife used to like, I just when I had a TV, I'd like, you know, I was slave to the commercial break and I'd like run in the kitchen and try to make myself a snack. Which is why I need to lose 50 pounds. But that's another story. But I'd be in the cupboard banging things around and she'd say, is something wrong? And every time too, and I was like, no, there's nothing wrong. I'm just trying to hurry to get back so I can don't miss part of my show, right? So I'm banging things around, not being too careful about it because I'm not conscious of making a ruckus, but I'm not passively aggressively slamming things in order to express anger about some unresolved issue.
How we
or
deal
something
with the
like that.
physical world
Right.
is also a way of defining emotions. Just like hitting the desk, that's referred to as anger, or crying is referred to sadness, usually.
Yeah, it might be different for different people, and it might
Yeah.
be different cultures, or it might be slightly different ways people express emotions. But if behavior can be misinterpreted, then it's hard to say, well, what's the real scoop? Is this really what anger is? Is it this list of emotions when you can be angry and not have these? Or sorry, you can't say anger is a set of behaviors if you can be angry without having any of those behaviors.
I don't think language is capable of explaining emotions fully because it's not detailed enough. Like,
I mean,
the English language, I feel, like no matter what, any language lacks in explaining such detail in how the brain is responding to things.
Well, it seems like it's not just necessarily the reference, but there's something like what like not the detail, but like the reference, like what's it referring to?
Yeah.
Is this referring to the way a person is behaving, or is it referring to something else?
If someone could explain like exactly what's going on with their emotions, you could detail that down to like like a specific event or like just a way that they act during some situations. If it was detailed enough, then I feel like you could use that to study how brains develop and whatnot.
Then there's a question about whether you could like look at a person's behavior and just know. So, the stuff about the brain state, maybe it's a little far from Ryle's idea where he says it's like overt or outward behavior. Now, let me just get to what he'll say, like, what about something where, so it's possible to misinterpret behavior. So his idea, one objection is like, you're really confusing mental states with like evidence for them, right? So there's two different things. There's one like, is Al angry? So the way we tell that Al is angry is he's exhibiting these behaviors. And then, but we could misinterpret it. We could be wrong.
Yeah, he could just kind of like.
It's our best guess.
He's super excited about it.
But you might say it's just because you can't peer into Al's soul, right? You can, and it's there's this joke Woody Allen had. It's what is it? I got caught cheating my metaphysics final. I was peering into the soul of the boy next to me. So, but you can't see what's in somebody else's mind directly. So you have to guess based on their behavior. But that doesn't mean that their behavior is what's in their mind. Like how do you tell you're angry? You like look in the mirror and like observe your face. Am I flushed in the face? Is my jaw clenched? Is my face contorted into a hideous mask? Right? You don't look at yourself in the mirror to see whether you're acting in an angry fashion to know whether you're angry. You feel it in here, right?
It's a chemical feeling versus like a state of love release different chemicals. Like you just get used to those different.
Yeah, people can't feel
different highs.
The chemicals you're experiencing and the same level of chemicals you're experiencing. Because I have a lot of friends that they just never get angry at anything. Like I play video games with them, never get angry, And I have other friends too that'll just get super upset over tiny little things in video games. I feel like that's just the way that their brains react to certain things and how much of that chemical is being released. But you can feel that chemical.
Yeah, apart from like whether you think it's chemical, whether you believe in the soul, it's still like it's a first person feeling. Like and there's this maybe there's a chemical story that's like associated with that. But it's not like suppose you're I don't know, you're part of a psychological experiment and you're sitting there, and then they have you hooked up to this equipment and then like they're showing you certain pictures and they like show you a picture of Trump and all of a sudden they say, oh wow, Trump's making you really angry. Because we see like your blood pressure's gone up and your heartbeat and respiration's gone up. That shows that you're angry. Would that come as a surprise to you? That's just an example, right? Some people love Trump, but some people have this visceral hatred. They go crazy, right, and start screeching at the sky, or whatever. But so you look at the physical picture might be correlated with those feelings, but suppose it might be the equipment would be malfunctioning, right? Suppose they say, you're really angry right now, and you'd be like, no, I'm not. You're like, you haven't fixed this equipment or something. It could be that they're wrong, and you would know. It wouldn't be like they would say, oh no, you're really angry. You just don't realize how angry you are. That you're a 9 out of 10 here of rage, and you're like, I don't know, I'm not really follow politics, right? So from your own self whether you're angry or not, just from introspecting into your own mind. So anger, it looks like, is a state of consciousness. It's not outward behavior. But the way we figure out whether a person is angry or not has to do with that. We're way past our break time. Let's take 10 minutes and come back and finish this off. Get into a debate on the nature of the soul.
We use that on PowerPoint Tuesday.
So let's, we're talking a little bit about robots. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence next week,
Yay.
so it should be fun. A little more on materialism. There's this guy, Julien Offray de la Mettrie, and he's a Frenchman and a famous materialist philosopher. And he pushes this thing called the mind-brain identity theory, or at least it's called that now, but this is pretty much Lemaitrie's view. And he says, he has this book called Man and Machine. So he says Descartes' half right, that human beings do have this machine-like quality to them. They're part of the physical world, it's cause and effect. It's this mechanistic approach to understanding reality. And there is no spiritual side to it at all, it's all mechanism. And so, let's see. So in the text, he gives these various arguments about how changes the material body cause changes in consciousness. And he talks about, like, if you don't get enough sleep, crabby, if you drink lots of alcohol, you become unruly and sometimes violent and more impulsive. And gives all the different ways in which changes to your body cause changes in consciousness. And he says the obvious conclusion is that your consciousness is a result of things going on in your physical body, particularly your brain. Right? You get hit in the head, you can't remember stuff. Or maybe you'll have problems processing information, you have brain damage, right? Has your soul been damaged? No, but so why should it matter? Like if consciousness happens in the soul, why should it matter if you get bashed over the head with a baseball bat? Why can't you remember things? Why can't you do math or process language in the right way? Well, it's because your brain is messed up, right? If all that stuff happens in your soul, it shouldn't make any difference.
Yeah, the soul can't be affected by the physical world.
Yeah. So the argument. Let me just see if I've got that on here. Let's skip over this vitalism analogy. I'll come back to that in a minute. Brain injuries cause mind injuries. Right, so if you damage the brain, then you get a change in consciousness. You can't process information correctly. And it's interesting, we can boil it down to, like, if one part of your brain gets damaged, you become a psycho, or you have wild mood swings, or your ethical sense disappears or is impaired. You lack empathy for others. If it's abnormal or poorly developed, you don't have that sense of right and wrong that everyone else has. If you get hit in one part of your brain, short-term memories can't be formed. Another part of your brain, long-term memories can't be formed.
Another part of the brain, you become insanely intelligent. or what are they called?
Savant.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are, like, it's true that, like, certain parts, you actually get savant syndrome. Sometimes it used to be called idiot savant. Now it's not PC, and now it's just savant. And I've known people. I know a person who's been diagnosed as having the savant syndrome, and you know, she struggles with, like, functioning in daily life, but can do, like, complex math problems in her head. Without, like, you know, the things that most people need a calculator for, and she just, like, knows the answer, right? So, but has problems, you know, balancing your checkbook sometimes, right? So it's or keeping on top of bills. So you have, like, all these cases of, like, you know, doctors treating injuries, head injuries, you get all sorts of changes to cognition. And, like, there's one guy, he had brain damage such that he couldn't form any long-term memories. So he would be in the hospital bed there, and he would, like, every time he'd greet the nurse, it would be like the first time he met her, because I think he could only remember, like, for maybe, you know, 15 minutes or something of what happened to him. And so every time he met, he'd read the same magazine over and over again because he'd forget what he read. And but all his long-term memories are intact. So he can remember all the things that happened to him, like when he was a kid, and had no problems with those. But anything that happened now, and it was hard to remember, or you couldn't remember it all. And so that shows that like there's different mechanisms in the brain with long-term and short-term memories. There's other people that get like this is more typical. They get a head trauma and they have amnesia, and sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent. Sometimes it's due to like using lots of drugs, and so and these people they can't remember any things that happened to them a long time ago, but they have no problem remembering things that happened to them now and happened to them last week. They just can't remember things that happened to them themselves 10 years ago, right? So again, this makes it look like it's all happening in the brain. Why do you get this cause and effect relationship every time you get a change in the brain, you get a change in cognition? Whether it's injury, whether it's abnormality, variation, it's always the one-to-one thing.
Do they claim that the soul also has to do with the personality? Is that what they usually claim?
Yeah, I think that like your soul is part of your consciousness. That includes your personality, sure. So then, here's another argument for dualism. Against dualism and for materialism. So why is it that as you look at in the animal kingdom, why is it that the more sophisticated the nervous system is, the more sophisticated the level of consciousness is as cashed out in terms of behavior? So you look at like ants, cockroaches, termites, right? They're individually they're not really capable of independent judgment. Their behavior is very robotic. It's not very sophisticated. They run on almost like a program. It's all innate knowledge. There's no like learning, or at least learning is very rudimentary. You can't train a cockroach to do anything. It's all stimulus response. But as you move up the food chain, you get like say, and what point do you like rats, right? So rats are highly intelligent. They're mammals. You can train a rat to run a maze. You can train rats to do tricks, walk a tightrope, and then you get to like the octopi. There's this octopi at this aquarium, so people come in the aquarium and they had like this fish tank, and every night like a fish was missing, and I thought one of the employees was coming in and taking the fish out of the aquarium and taking it home and cook it up and eating it. And they're like, who keeps on stealing the fish? So they put a security camera up there, right? So this octopus puts its tentacle out, reaches out, monkeys around, unhooks the mechanism, the locking mechanism, and unlatches its tank, comes out, slithers over to the fish tank, opens up the fish tank, gets in there, grabs a fish, eats it, goes back to its tank, and crawls back in.
Does he lock it back up?
I don't know if he locked it back up. I think it just like latches automatically, but you can't open it easily. But so I mean, octopi actually pretty smart. Parrots, there's a parrot named Alex that like learned how to read.
Yeah.
And they can use language meaningfully, and they understand words. And dogs and cats, learn, and then you look at it. By the time you get to gorillas, you get something approaching human intelligence, and like a gorilla or chimpanzee has about the intelligence of maybe a 4 or 5 year old human, to the point where you have like I think this was Coco the gorilla, who was one of the ones that was fairly well like trained in language, and Coco was watching a TV, and there's this movie where there's this kid and he's going off to boarding school or something like that. He's on a train and he's crying as he's watching his parents and leaving and going off to some faraway place away from his parents, and the kid's crying, and Coco was watching this, and Coco starts to cry, and Coco signs to the trainer, Coco sad, and he understood that like the boy but he says boy goes away or something like that, right? So he got like the context, like this is a sad movie. Here's a gorilla crying at a sad movie, right? So there you're getting something that's really close to human level intelligence and seems to have some overlap with it. And why is that? Well, you look at a gorilla's brain, look at a human being's brain, and you see there's lots of similarities. It's very sophisticated. It's this complex neural network. You look at the brain of a squid, not quite as sophisticated, or a dog or a cat, not as sophisticated. And as you go down the food chain, you get more rudimentary behavior, more instinct, less ability to learn, until you get to like an ant or a cockroach, or an amoeba, where it's all just sort of reflex, or a worm, right? Where it's very reflexive and instinctual. So why is that? Well, and then why, once you get to like you get to the Coco there, and you say, oh, Coco's not a human being. He doesn't have a soul. But human beings, we have souls. So all these other animals who are capable of emotions and learning and social relations and so on, and being able to read and count and solve problems. Like you look at like chimpanzees, you hang some bananas from the ceiling and you throw some boxes in the corner, and pretty soon they look up at the bananas and they're like, oh, those bananas look good. They look over the boxes and look at the bananas. They walk over there, pick up a box, and they just stack them up and climb up and grab the bananas pretty soon. And that's problem solving, right? Oh, but the idea is they don't have souls, but human beings do. Well, that seems like a kind of an arbitrary distinction. So why is it?
At what point does the soul get created?
Yeah, well, the idea is that if you can explain cognition and emotions and social behavior in these lower animals, just in terms of like evolutionary psychology and brain activity, why suddenly when you get to human beings who aren't that much farther than the gorillas, why do you assign them a soul and say, oh, suddenly perception and cognition isn't a feature of the brain, suddenly all this stuff happens in the soul, and the brain's just some sort of interface. So it seems that the materialists will say, look, that doesn't make any sense to say that in all these lower animals it's the soul, it's the brain, but then, and the nervous system, but then in human beings it's the soul. And it just seems really convenient that the more sophisticated the nervous system, the more sophisticated the level of consciousness is, right? Now you might, I suppose, say, okay, well, a cockroach has a soul too. It's just like a rudimentary soul, and it works to the cockroach brain. Or I think they have like a sort of dispersed nervous system, and you can go down and say, there's the rat soul and the parrot soul and so on. But it seems kind of weird to think about animals having souls. But even though, so why do the animals have different souls that just happen coincidentally to correspond with their nervous system?
Well, just recently it's this type of worm. It's like a really, really tiny thing, and it only has its brain is super tiny. So we were able to map out every single piece of this worm, and then we took synthetic like synapses in a computer program, just like on and off, very rudimentary.
Right.
We were able to translate its entire brain and the entire animal itself into a computer, and then put it in a robot, and the robot started moving. So I mean,
cool, yeah.
Yeah, you're putting consciousness in it, but that robot doesn't know that it should eat like a worm does.
Yeah.
It only can move. But right now they're still working on trying to make it so that it's like needing to eat and does all the things that a worm does. But I mean, if that is proven real, then if you could do that with a human, then I would kind of end the debate of whether a soul exists or not, because you can make that in software,
Yeah.
organic.
Yeah, and one of the problems too with the, maybe I'll save this stuff for our discussion of artificial intelligence. Why is it that you think that, why is it that the consciousness of an animal seems to correspond so closely with how sophisticated their nervous system is? And why is it that the animals that are most like us have the nervous system that are the most like us? So any thoughts, like, if you're a dualist, like, what were you going to say about this?
I don't know. I would say that if you have a more sophisticated nervous system, it allows for you to take more precautionary measures. So, like some people have nervous systems, but some people can't feel heat. So they'll burn their limbs awfully and not even know that it happened, like stepping into a super hot tub. They won't know it's burning them. But if someone has a sophisticated nervous system that is working, they know, well, I probably shouldn't touch that because it's going to cause damage to my body.
Oh, well, it's, and maybe I should have specified like central nervous system. So like you look at, some like shrimp. There's a question about whether shrimp feel pain. And one reason why like some vegetarians will eat shrimp is they have like this collection of like, they call it ganglia, but they don't have like a central nervous system to process nerve impulses. So the nerves are sort of distributed throughout the animal because they're super simple and super primitive. So the question is like, do the shrimp really feel pain, or is it just sort of stimulus response? So that, but it looks like, so that's like a super rudimentary system. But you think about like a central nervous system that deals with, say, perception, emotions, like fear, like or desire, right? All those things seem to be part of conscious animals.
And are you saying that's part of the nervous system?
Yeah. So the central nervous system. Basically, maybe I should have said brain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So you have like a shrimp doesn't really have a brain, is because it's a central nervous system. But you look at all these other animals, what they seem to have a brain and they seem to have consciousness. But most people wouldn't say they have souls. But why do human beings have souls? And why is it that the more sophisticated the nervous system, the more like us they get? It seems like this points to this idea that all there is to a human being is just their nervous system. It's just their brain. Your brain is the thing that does the thinking, does the feeling, does the contemplating, and there's no soul that you need to explain. Like there was some philosopher that had an audience with Napoleon, and Napoleon had read his book and said, "Sir, I only have one question. What place does God have in your theory?" And the philosopher said, "Sir, I have no need of that hypothesis." Right? Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, okay, here's my philosophical theory, and why do I need God? I explain everything with my theory, and there's nothing that needs to be explained that God's not going to help me out. And so in the same way, it seems like we can explain everything about consciousness in terms of the central nervous system or the brain. Why do we need to resort to a discussion of the soul? That would be the skeptical argument. And this goes along with the vitalism analogy. So vitalism is this, it's this theory that there's a vital force. It was basically like a spiritual force responsible for biological life. Sometimes it's associated with the soul, but sometimes it's this sort of idea of the life principle. There's a cheesy and actually pretty good horror movie called Life Force, where there's like this alien that sucks the life force out of people and turns you into like a grizzled corpse by sucking out your life force. And that relies on this sort of idea of the vital force, that there's some sort of like, kind of like life energy that courses through your body that's responsible for your being alive. And people used to believe in this up till the early 20th century, in this kind of vital force, and you even see scientists talking about the life force. And now, so around the turn of the 20th century, people figured out that it's all like electrochemical reactions in your body. It's like the mitochondria, right? So if you remember your junior high school biology, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the soul. It's what produces energy. It uses ATP, and there's this chemical cycle that it describes how your cells use energy, how they take food and turn it into energy. So once they figured that out, they got rid of the vital force. Okay, we understand this is how your body takes food and turns it into energy, and this is what makes a person alive. It's that you have a metabolism, and you're able to metabolize food and turn it into energy. And now we can even look at the how many kilocalories, right? It's a measure of energy a given piece of food has and how much your body can use it. So that's,
I would say the life force is electricity, because your body can power like a light bulb, right?
yeah, I think a small one.
Yeah, like small light bulb, but I mean,
You
without
produce
that,
it,
well,
but there's
what-
also like chemical energy too. Like you're like, you know, you're burning, people talk about burning calories. Like you're taking the energy from the food, like you're taking the food, your body breaks it down into simple sugars, and then your body uses that as energy. Like you digest it,
yeah,
you
but
break down the
that
cells.
usually turns into producing like electricity for you to stimulate your muscles, you know?
I mean, your body uses electricity to move your muscles and also for consciousness, electricity is necessary. But that electricity is generated by like chemical energy. Think about like, think about like a battery, right? So a battery produces electricity from a chemical reaction.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so then once you figure out, okay, this is how this is produced, your body produces this energy that makes you alive, you get rid of this superstitious idea of the life force, right? That's something you might read about in some old book, but yeah, if you're doing modern science, you read like some scientific journal today, like a microbiology, there's no references to the life force, unless it's some historical survey, right? And they refer to some dead superstitious
It's on
theory.
Facebook now.
Yeah, so I know people, of course, believe in all kinds of wacky things today that aren't scientific. But so they'll say, look, in the same way, once we figure out how the brain works and how it produces consciousness, we're going to get rid of this idea of the soul. It's going to go on the dustbin of history in the same way the vital force got jumped a long time ago. So that's the argument anyway of the materialists. Here's an interesting thing. So like, how come every time you bring somebody back to life, the soul always manages to make its way back? If there is a soul, why does it always come back to the body when you jumpstart the body with a pair of like defibrillating paddles, right? Somebody's, the Red has the big one come. He has a heart attack, clutches his chest, falls down, and you just like, you get in there, you breathe into his lungs and get him inflating. You do chest compressions, or maybe you get out like the electric paddles and give his chest a jolt. Maybe you like give a shot of adrenaline into his heart. And all of a sudden his heart starts beating, his lungs start inflating, and he eventually regains consciousness and starts talking and thinking and doing all those things that make us think that he's conscious. How come the soul how come he didn't come back as a soulless zombie? I thought his soul, he's dead, right? Why isn't his soul floating up to heaven? Why does it come back? It seems really convenient that every time somebody's brought back to life, the soul comes back too.
Are you sure they're dead though?
Oh, there's no heartbeat, there's no respiration, no brain activity.
Yeah, what do you define as dead?
The
I
eyes
guess
are
that's
your pupils fixed and dilated.
Would being dead be the there's no way that you can't come back. But then, science 100, 200 years down the line, they would say, well, it is possible to bring it back at that point. Like, let's say 5 hours after they die or something like that.
Yeah, I've got a video I'm going to show about cryonics, and one of the guys, the father of cryonics, says, well, when you're dead when you're never revived. So whether you're dead now doesn't depend on your state now, it depends on your state in the future. This is kind of interesting to think about, like, what is death? But you can be clinically dead, right? So this idea is that once you're clinically dead, there's no heartbeat, no respiration, that the story is that, people say this in the hospital room, he's gone, right? Well, where'd he go? Well, that means his soul, floated off into heaven. But then why, but if you get the defibrillator paddles and you get everything working with the body, why does he come back? It just seems kind of weird. Now, if you're a materialist, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's like an automobile, right? Why is the car running? Oh, because I put in a spark plug, right? That it was missing a spark plug. Or why is the car running now and it didn't run before? Well, because I replaced the head gasket and put oil back in it, or whatever. I swapped out the carburetor with a rebuilt one, and now it works just fine. It's just a mechanical system. So here's a question, what's the materialist gonna say, or the dualist gonna say about this one?
They would say that the soul is still there, where it comes back, right?
I suppose you'd have to say it's some sort of law where that the soul is attracted to the body, or God sends the soul back every time the body it starts working again. I mean, it raises some questions about like how this is supposed to work. So that's like a big question mark on the dualist side. The materialists don't have to worry about.
And then the way they back it up is, well, I saw the afterlife, I saw heaven. And
Yeah.
they probably did, but they're probably hallucinating off DMT that was released when they die.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about that too. The near-death experiences is ahead of us too. So, so one of the things that they'll say about this sort of idea of the soul is that there's an analogy of the race car driver. So you think about like if you're in a race, you think about like this is sort of like a variation of Descartes' analogy. So if you're in a race, you could be the best driver in the world, but if your car has a flat tire, you're not going to win any races. You'll be all over the track, run into things, right? You're not going to win if you're missing a tire. So in the same way, the soul could be untouched, but the body could have a problem, and then the effects you observe is a person not be able to think right, having mood swings. That's because they have a problem with their brain. The soul interfaces to the brain, and then because it does that, it's going to have problems. Now, once the soul's like disembodied, then maybe it can think fine. But if you're embodied and you have to work through a damaged brain, then you're going to have some issues.
Do dualists believe in ghosts?
I think some of them do.
Yeah.
There's a question about what a ghost would be. We're actually going to come to that when we talk about functionalism next time. So we're going to get to all this stuff. You're asking good questions. But let's just think about this idea. Okay, so their argument is it might seem like every time you damage the brain, it causes changes in consciousness. And that might make you say, okay, the mind is the brain. I'm going to accept the mind-brain identity theory because every time there's a change in the brain, there's a change in the mind. But the dualist is going to say, no, when there's a change in the brain, there's not a change in the mind. There's a change in how the mind is expressed in the material world. And that's because the soul has to work with the brain. When the soul is detached to the brain, there won't be those problems. So what do you think about that? The brain is the interface that the mind has to work through. If you damage the brain, you damage the expression of the mind in the world. So you're not really damaging the soul, and thinking really does happen in the soul, but the soul has to work through the brain. It's a sort of interface between mind and body. Does that explain away the objections? Does it get the dualists off the hook?
I mean, but they can't show evidence of it. They can't show the evidence of the mind affecting the brain. And so it's just the brain affecting the brain.
Well, I suppose you might say, like, what proof is there of the soul?
Do they look at it like the fact that you can think about that you're thinking? Is that the mind thinking about the brain thinking?
I think that's what Descartes would say. Descartes would say, you know that you exist, and that your knowledge of your own your knowledge of your soul is actually more certain than your knowledge that there's a material world. You know that you exist as a thinking thing. Your belief in a material world is an inference based on your experience, your first person experience or awareness, right? So you know that you're thinking and you're aware of all the contents of your mind, and then you have all these sensations, and then you infer that these sensations are part of a material world. But there's a step there. but you don't have to go through any steps to know like what you're thinking about, or that you're having sensations. Like I'm having a sensation of a certain shape that's blue and it looks sort of, silver, and I think it's the shape of a chair. But then I have to say, well, there's gotta be something causing that expression. I'll say, there's probably a real chair out there in a physical world causing my sensation.
Oh, yeah,
But my awareness, my awareness of my own mind and that I'm perceiving the chair, that comes first. That's more primary.
I had a idea on like imagination and like why that's possible and how you can imagine things that don't actually exist in the world that you exist in. And I thought, if it was possible, and it also bases off the universe being infinite. So if the universe is infinite, there's an infinite possibility that you could have like every single atom in your body entangled with another. But it could be entangled, no matter how far you could travel, even if it is in a different universe. There's an experience that you've had where I was sitting in this room and there was a pterodactyl sitting in the middle of the room. Like maybe in a different universe that actually did happen, and I'm capable of pulling out that imagination and having a visual of that actually being, like you can visualize it.
That sounds like a super complex explanation for something that might be very simpler.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a great analogy for this idea of the mind's interface to the brain. So, like, the other thing you could do is you could say, well, okay, how can I think about a gold mountain? Like, well, okay, I've seen gold, and I've seen a mountain. I just take those two ideas and I put them together in my mind. And even though there may have never been a gold mountain, I can think about gold in the abstract, I can think about mountains, and I can sort of put them together and have an idea of a gold mountain, right? And so that seems like a simpler explanation than your the multiple worlds thing. So then the question is, like, if you have these two explanations, which one should you prefer? And there's a principle called Occam's razor that says you should always prefer the simplest explanation, all of the things being equal. So the simplest explanation possible given the data. So like if you have two hypotheses. One is the mind is the brain, and so every time you get a change in the brain, you get a change in the mind. The other one is, okay, the mind is not the brain. The mind is an immaterial substance, but it has to work through a material brain, so that when you get a damage to the brain, the mind can't work with the brain as well as it might, and so that leads to a difference in consciousness as it is expressed in the world. That's a lot more complex. And then the question is like, what additional reason do you have to think that that there's a soul that's distinct from the brain that's doing the thinking? Why not just say that the brain's what's doing the thinking? It seems like you need an extra reason to add in the soul, something that can't be explained by talking about the brain. And this is why sometimes Occam's razor is put as what Occam actually says. William of Occam came up with this Occam's razor. He says, don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So in other words, if you're going to try to explain something, don't come up with a bunch of theoretical entities to try to explain something that's happening. Because any theory, there's a bunch of different ways you could account for something. You can pick something super complex or something simple, and the simple one's usually the right one. Like they had, I think I talked about this before, when they first moved from like this idea that Earth's the center of the universe to realizing that the Earth spins like a top and goes around the sun, spinning on its axis. You look at those two theories. There's one like the Earth sitting here and all the planets going around it. It looks a lot simpler than, the Earth's like spinning like a top going around the sun like this. And you look at those two things and you think, well, and then you have to explain why doesn't everything fly off the Earth from like centrifugal force, and why doesn't it feel like we're moving, and why is it I look at the horizon, it looks flat, right? So there's lots of reasons to prefer the Earth as the center of the universe. But when you look at through a telescope and you're watching like the planet Mars or Venus, and you're seeing it go across the sky, and each night you sort of plot it and then it's like doubling back and doing this weird kind of like squiggly thing. Pretty soon you plot this path and it's like going like all over the place. And you think, well, let me finish. And so you look at the weird irregular path that's going all over the place. Then you can do two things. You can either say that it's sort of that it's going around a circle around the Earth like this, and then if that doesn't, then you get even better observations. You can add like it's going in a circle, and you sort of have it sort of doing all these weird kind of complicated circles, and it works with the theory. So you can have these, they call them epicycles. So you can have epicycles, and then epicycles within epicycles. And so you get this really complicated model that preserves the idea that Earth's stationary and the planets are going around it to explain this irregular patterns, and it works. But at a certain point, those patterns get so irregular and so complex, you think, okay, that's probably not like that. Probably what's happened is the Earth is third rock from the sun, going on like this around the sun, and that's eventually why we changed over to that view, based on the way the theories work out. The one theory got totally complex. The data made it look like it wasn't tenable anymore because it got super complicated. The simpler explanation was very elegant and made sense and fit the data a lot better without a bunch of weird stuff added on. What were you gonna say?
Well, I was just kind of thinking about, those are still simple questions people ask. I'm wondering what the fundamental questions are. Like, why does gravity have the exact force that it has, and or like what dictates that? Like, I think like quantum physics is more of like the fundamental questions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, even though some things can be explained simply, I think there's still an extremely complex underlying answer to it that we can't necessarily know yet, because there's a lot of information we don't know yet.
Well, the goal of physics, like string theory right now, is to come up with an equation that's an inch long. It's like Michio Kaku talks about that, and like to have a unified field theory that will say, okay, what is the fundamental force which explains the strong and weak nuclear forces and gravity and electromagnetism? And there's the hope that all these different things we say are all part of one phenomenon we don't quite get yet. And the reason that's preferable, you want to have one fundamental force instead of four, because it's more elegant and it's more simple. And it's thought that that the four forces we have right now it's kind of like this epicycles thing. It's not quite right, but it's the best we can do right now, and where there's something we're not getting. So when you look at dualism versus materialism, the dualist picture is really complicated, and you have these weird paradoxes about like, okay, well, you have to come up with these ad hoc explanations. Oh, there's a rule that God set up a law, the soul always comes back if you jumpstart the body and get it going physically. So for some reason it's attracted, or it's compelled or ordered to go back into the body once it works again. Seems kind of like it's sort of why. What evidence is there for that? Why is it that the more sophisticated the brain is, the more conscious and capable of problem solving it is? Why is it it's in complex brains that the animal is capable of social behavior? Why is it that really primitive animals with primitive nervous systems behave in a robotic manner based on instinct? So it makes it look like it's all the nervous system. So unless you have some reason, some extra reason to believe that there is a soul, or that the soul, unless there's something you can explain that you can't explain with the brain, and you need to invoke the soul, then it seems like you stick with the simplest explanation and just go with the mind-brain identity theory. And that's all I have. I can hear the music. Let's see. So next week we'll be talking about functionalism, artificial intelligence. I'll show some clips of those Boston Dynamics robot dogs.
Nice.
And we'll even talk about ghosts.
Yeah.
See you on